They called it the house that never slept. At the end of Black Hollow Road, where the pavement gave way to gravel, and the woods began to swallow the light, the Harrow home stood like a wound that refused to heal. 2 stories of warped timber, windows clouded by dust and time, a porch that leaned as if tired of its own secrets. Locals said the forest around it never grew right. The grass turned grey, animals gave it distance, and even the wind seemed to change its tone when it passed through the hollow. The Harrows kept to themselves. Alma, the mother, was seen most Sundays at church, dressed in faded lace, her hair pinned tight like she was holding something together. Her husband, Virgil, worked the land that never gave back. He sold corn that didn't grow from the earth, but from jars hidden in the cellar, people said. Their children, 3 of them, walked in a line behind her like shadows that had learned obedience. They didn't play with other kids. They didn't speak much. When they did, it was in whispers, like they were afraid the trees might hear. In the summer of 1978, a drifter passed through town. No one knew his name, just that he carried a guitar and a smile too easy for a man who'd seen the road that long. He was last spotted near the Harrow property, asking for water. The next morning, his guitar was found propped against a fence post, strings snapped clean. Sheriff Dalton wrote it off as another transient moving on, but in his private notes, later found in a box of old case files, he wrote 6 words: "The house watches when you stop." Strange lights began to appear not long after. Orange glows deep in the forest, pulsing like a heartbeat under the soil. Hunters swore they heard singing, low, drawn-out hymns that drifted through the fog. The old men at the diner laughed it off, called it moonshine talk. But one of them, Earl Kessler, stopped laughing when his dog came home, covered in mud that smelled of iron and rot. He said it wasn't mud at all. A photographer from the next county came through that autumn, chasing stories of rural folklore. He took pictures of barns, fields, and one of the Harrow house. When the film was developed, every frame came out clear, except the last. The Harrow home looked different in that one. The windows weren't windows anymore. They were open mouths. The photographer never returned to collect the prints. People say the family moved away sometime in the early 80s, but no one remembers a truck leaving. No one remembers saying goodbye. The mailbox still bears their name, though it's rusted and caved in, and the air around the property feels heavy, like it's waiting. Some nights, a faint light flickers behind the cracked curtains. Those who've seen it swear it's not fire, not a lamp, but something alive. No one dares to knock anymore. The woods have grown thick again, but the path to the porch remains clear, as if something still walks it. And when the wind rises through the hollow, it sounds almost like breathing. Or maybe it's just the house, remembering who it took. The first sign came with the sheep. In the spring of 1979, farmers along Black Hollow Road began waking to silence. No bleating, no rustle of movement from the pens, only the hollow hum of morning air. When they found the animals, their bodies were untouched, except for a single wound at the throat. The blood was gone, drawn out as if by something patient. Their bones, stripped clean, were later discovered in circles across the Harrow property, small, perfect rings that no animal could have made. The sheriff blamed coyotes, but even he knew coyotes didn't prey. Children walking to school found carvings in the trees near the Harrow fence line, symbols no one recognized. Triangles folded into crosses, lines that curved like rivers meeting. The bark bled sap that stained their hands a deep red. That week, Alma Harrow was seen at the edge of town, buying salt by the pound and muttering to herself that the earth was hungry again. When asked what she meant, she only smiled and said, "If you don't feed it, it feeds on you." Each strange event came with the moon. The first on a crescent, the next on a full. The pattern grew clear to those who paid attention, though few wanted to. The Harrow fields, once lifeless, began to bloom unnaturally thick, corn taller than a man, soil black as coal. Even the air smelled sweet near their property, but underneath it lingered something metallic sharp, like the taste of blood on a bitten tongue. A county worker named Joel Barker came by that summer to check a broken water line near the Harrow well. He radioed his supervisor at 2:07 p.m., saying he'd found something carved into the pipe. No one heard from him again. When the sheriff's men searched the area, they found his hard hat half buried in the mud, the radio still on, faint static crackling through. Alma stood by the fence the whole time, calm, hands folded, telling them, "You'll only find what you bring with you." They left empty-handed. Rumors spread fast. Some said Alma was descended from an old settler sect that worshipped the soil itself, not as a god, but as a mouth that demanded flesh to stay fertile. Others claimed the Harrows had books written in languages no one alive could read. Late one night, a deputy broke into their barn, hoping to find proof. He never spoke of what he saw, but his report, one page, half-burned, survived. It mentioned chambers beneath the fields and walls that move like lungs. Years later, the ground behind the Harrow house would be dug up, and those chambers would finally be found. They weren't storage cellars or root cellars or storm shelters. They were rooms lined with stone, packed with the remains of animals, and some that weren't animals at all. When the forensics team entered, their lights flickered, the air turning damp and warm, like the inside of something breathing. And under the dirt, where roots and bones tangled together, there were still traces of blood, fresh enough to stain the gloves of the men who dared to touch it. Whatever the Harrows had been feeding, it had not yet finished eating. By the winter of 1983, the Harrow house had gone silent. No smoke from the chimney, no voices in the yard, only the sound of crows settling on the roof, like they were keeping watch. It was a mail carrier who first noticed something wrong, weeks of letters piling up, a smell rising from the porch boards, sweet and sick all at once. When the sheriff finally signed the warrant, the deputies found the doors bolted from the inside. They broke through a window and stepped into a home that felt frozen in time. Plates still sat on the table, food long spoiled. A clock ticked faintly, though its hands had stopped years ago. In the back room, they found a rug nailed to the floor. Underneath it was a trapdoor sealed with iron wire. When they pried it open, the air that came up was warm, wet, and sour. Their flashlights cut through the dark, revealing a staircase that seemed to descend far deeper than the foundations allowed. At the bottom, they found 3 children. They were thin, pale, and barefoot, their eyes adjusting to light that hurt them. None of them spoke for hours. The smallest one just hummed a tune, slow, circular, the same line over and over. Doctors later wrote that their skin bore symmetrical burn marks, small circular scars that formed patterns along their spines and wrists. When asked how they got them, the eldest, a boy around 12, said they were mother's prayers. He said the fire was her way of keeping them clean, that it kept the mouths under the floor from waking. The social workers assumed hallucination, trauma, the usual explanations that made sense on paper. But none of those reports ever reached the public. The official statement called it a case of severe neglect. Nothing more. Years later, copies of those sealed files leaked. They told of drawings the children made, black circles filled with red lines, human figures drawn upside down, and what looked like open jaws stretching across the ground. The psychologist's notes mentioned words the children used repeatedly: feeding, singing, and Isaac leads. Isaac Harrow, the eldest, was described as calm, articulate, strangely persuasive for his age. On his final evaluation form, the therapist wrote a single line: "He believes the ritual isn't finished." Isaac vanished from protective custody 5 days later. The window of his dorm was locked from the inside, and his bed sheets were neatly folded. All he left behind was a scrap of paper hidden under the mattress. It read, "She sits, still talking." For years after, workers at the facility claimed to hear footsteps in the basement, even when it was empty. And sometimes, just before lights out, children said they could hear someone humming, slow and circular, coming from the vents below. The barn was already half collapsed when they found it, a skeleton of wood and rust hidden deep behind a wall of pines. Inside, under a layer of dust and mold, a man named Henry Clow found a small metal trunk. He was a collector of odd things, old film reels, forgotten letters, the kind of man who believed history didn't disappear, it just waited to be found again. Inside that trunk was a single VHS tape, wrapped in burlap. Its label was written in fading ink, Harvest 79. He almost threw it out. Almost. That night, curiosity won. He set up an old player in his garage, the screen flickering to life with a soft hiss. The first minute was nothing but static and wind. Then shapes began to move, a field under moonlight, shadows shifting like waves. There were figures, 10 or maybe 12, wearing animal masks made of bone and hide. Their breathing was heavy, rhythmic, in sync with the sound of drums somewhere off-screen. The camera shook, as if the person holding it was trembling. Then came the chanting, low, ancient syllables that rolled like thunder over gravel. At first, Henry thought it was a hoax. Some local kids making a horror film. But when the chanting stopped, the figures turned toward the lens. Every mask faced him at once. One of them stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. The camera zoomed in, slowly, until the cloth fell away. For a moment, Henry thought it was a doll. Then it moved. The tape cut to black. 2 days later, Henry reported the find to the sheriff. Within a week, federal agents arrived in unmarked cars. They took the tape, the trunk, even the player. Henry was told not to speak of it again, but a copy, a degraded, glitched version, surfaced online almost a decade later. The footage was grainier, distorted, but the details were unmistakable. Investigators and language experts analyzed the audio and concluded that the chants matched an extinct dialect spoken by early Ozark settlers who vanished in the 1800s. No one could explain how the language survived, or how the Harrows learned it. The FBI issued a statement calling the video fabricated, yet researchers noticed the timestamp at the corner of the frame, June 14, 1979. The same night, 3 people went missing from neighboring counties. One of them was a county worker named Joel Barker. The copy disappeared from the internet as suddenly as it appeared, every upload removed, every link broken. Henry Clow moved away soon after and was later found dead of an apparent stroke, though neighbors said they heard the sound of static from his house the night before. Some swear the tape still exists, hidden somewhere in the Ozarks, waiting for another hand to press play. Claire Denton had spent years chasing stories that no one else would touch. She believed that the truth lived in the shadows, in the places people were too afraid to look. In the summer of 2005, her obsession led her to the Ozarks. She was following a whisper, a name that surfaced again and again in old police files and hospital logs. Isaac Harrow, the boy from the cellar who had vanished without a trace. For most, his story was legend, another ghost buried by rumor. But Claire didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in proof. The trail led her to Stone County, to an abandoned lead mine carved into the side of a forested hill. Locals told her not to go near it. They said the air there burned your throat, that machines left running nearby would shut off by themselves. At night, some claimed to see faint lights flickering deep inside, like candles swaying in an unseen hand. Claire wrote in her notebook that the warnings were nothing more than folklore, but her last entries began to change in tone. Her final pages described finding signs of habitation, a rough camp built around the mine's entrance, a collection of carved wooden figures scattered across the rocks. They were shaped like mouths, open and gaping, painted in streaks of red clay and ash. Inside the mine, the walls were lined with animal skulls, their hollow eyes filled with melted wax. She wrote that the air breathed, expanding and contracting with a faint hum that seemed to come from beneath the stone. On her last recorded tape, her voice trembled. "He's here," she said softly. "He never left." The audio ended in static. Claire was never seen again. When search teams arrived weeks later, they found her car parked by the tree line, the keys still in the ignition. Inside the mine, they found her camera, the lens cracked, covered in dust, and something else, something wrapped in a burlap cloth. It was a wooden idol, human-sized, bound with strips of hair and what appeared to be dried skin. The carvings on its surface matched the same symbols found near the Harrow fields decades earlier. Forensics confirmed the hair was human. The DNA matched Isaac Harrow. That discovery should have been impossible. Isaac would have been nearly 40, yet no record of his existence appeared after 1983. The file was quietly sealed, labeled as a non-criminal missing person case. But in the weeks that followed, residents near Stone County began reporting strange sights, lights glowing from the mine at dusk, low hymns echoing across the hills when the moon was full. One farmer swore he saw a man standing at the entrance, pale as chalk, his hands raised as if in prayer. When officers returned, the mine was empty, but the wooden idol had been moved, closer to the surface, facing outward, as if something inside wanted to see the world again. The air there still hums at night. Some say it's the wind through the tunnels. Others say it's Isaac, waiting for the next voice to follow the echo home. The summer of 2018 was the driest the Ozarks had seen in 50 years. Rivers thinned to trickles, and the creek that once wound behind the old Harrow property dried to a cracked spine of earth and stone. Locals said the land was revealing what it had swallowed. When a group of hikers stumbled across the bones, they thought they'd found an animal graveyard until they noticed the teeth. Human, small, perfectly preserved beneath the mud. Word spread fast, and by morning, the site was crawling with investigators. The old Harrow house loomed above them like a witness finally breaking its silence. The first excavation uncovered more than 20 sets of remains. Men, women, and children, their bones arranged in spirals. Some were wrapped in fragments of burlap, others buried with trinkets carved from bone. But what chilled the forensic team most was the variety of time periods. The oldest bones were over 100 years old. Others were much newer, from the 1970s, even the early 2000s. It was as if the earth beneath the Harrow land had been fed across generations, each decade adding another layer to its hunger. Archaeologists from the State University arrived soon after. They believed the site predated the Harrow family, that the house had simply been built over something ancient. A settler ritual meant to repay the soil. The circular burial patterns matched those found in early Ozark colonies that vanished without record. But this discovery didn't fit the textbooks. Mixed among the skeletons were modern artifacts, rusted belt buckles, broken watches still faintly ticking from water damage, even a pair of shoes that couldn't have existed before 1980. Then came the lockbox. It was small, iron, and sealed with rust so thick it had to be pried open with tools. Inside were photographs, black and white at first, then color, each one showing faces of people, long listed as missing. Some were hikers, others locals, a few children who vanished from neighboring towns. Each photo had been marked on the back with the same date, the night of a full moon. The final photograph showed a man with hollow eyes and an unshaven face standing beside a creek, the same creek they were digging in. His name, written faintly in pencil, was Isaac Harrow. The discovery made national news for a single day before the story vanished from every major outlet. The footage was pulled, the reports deleted, the site declared off-limits for safety reasons. Those who worked the dig still speak of what happened on the last night, how the air grew thick, how their instruments began to fail, how the ground beneath their boots seemed to breathe. One of the archaeologists later said she heard singing, faint but clear, coming from the lowest pit where the lockbox was found. She couldn't make out the words, only the tone, low, steady, and mournful. The creek has long since refilled, its surface calm again, hiding everything beneath. But the locals say that when the moon returns to its fullest, the water runs redder, slower, as if remembering. And if you stand still long enough, you can feel the land itself shift, not as something dead, but as something waiting. Today, the Harrow property stands behind a rusted chain-link fence, wrapped in vines that have swallowed the old house whole. The sign reads, "No trespassing," but it doesn't stop anyone. Curious hikers, ghost hunters and filmmakers still find their way in, driven by the same hunger that once lived in the family who built it. The path to the ruins is narrow, marked by roots that twist like veins through the soil. When the wind moves, the trees make a sound that isn't quite a whisper and not quite a sigh, something between the two, like a voice remembering its shape. The house itself is barely standing. Its roof has collapsed, the porch caved in, the windows gaping like blind eyes. Yet people who wander too close swear they hear music coming from within, faint hymns carried on the wind, always the same slow rhythm, always in threes. Some hikers record it, but the sound never stays on playback. The audio degrades, the pitch distorts, and in one case, a voice whispered beneath the static, "You shouldn't have come." Last year, a drone pilot flying over the site captured something strange. A pale figure standing at the tree line, motionless, watching the camera. When the footage was reviewed frame by frame, the figure was gone, replaced by an empty patch of ground. Investigators called it a trick of light, but the pilot said he saw it move, said its face was white as bone. Then came the killings. Small animals first, deer, raccoons, dogs from nearby farms, each one found drained, their bodies arranged in spirals just like the old Harrow circles. DNA samples were taken from the sites, and the results made headlines for a moment before the story disappeared. The samples matched the Harrow bloodline. Every registered descendant, however, had been confirmed dead for decades. The official statement blamed contamination in the lab, but the technician who processed the samples told a different story. She said the readings weren't just human. They were mixed, layered, like something that had learned to adapt. Local townsfolk don't argue science. They have their own name for it, the harvest returning. They say the land was never cleansed, that when the drought came and the creek exposed its grave, something old woke up again. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but the land itself, reclaiming what was once promised. Those who camped nearby claim to hear footsteps circling their tents at night, always stopping just outside the light. And when the morning comes, they find symbols drawn in the dirt, fresh, as if made by hands that don't leave prints. The Harrow story is one most platforms refuse to tell, too dark, too uncertain, too real. But the files, the photos, the blood tests, they still exist, hidden in archives, sealed under red tape, waiting, because in the Ozarks people say the land keeps its own records, and when the moon swells full, the soil breathes again, patient, living, hungry. The harvest never ended. It only went quiet.